whole bunch of inner workings in my head was when you talked about your grandmother, where she said, don't go around, go around, go over, do whatever you got to do. We use the analogy a lot of when adversity hits you, you almost got to turn yourself into water, and water will find its way around, over, or through, and it even has the power to move the obstacles it wants moved out of its way. And we relate power a lot to that inner drive. What drives you? What's your passion? Because if your passion's strong enough, do you not believe that it can overcome any adversity that you face?
Coupled with action, yes. Mm-hmm. Just being passionate and sitting here being passionate isn't going to get my website done. So
yes, no, I agree with you completely there. Yes,
there is the piece that says, and this is like an old 12-step concept about just showing up and doing what's in front of you. And a lot of times what's in front of us is pretty mundane. It's not going to change the world. And, I've got to pay that bill, and I've got to wash, do a load of laundry, or, put these papers in a file or something. And those are important too. So take whatever steps need to be taken, but do something. I know somebody who spends an awful lot of time being inspired. And God bless her, I've known this person for many, many years, and she is the most inspired person I know, and she's still exactly where she was many, many years ago. So it's not just inspiration and validation, it's also action. Do what you set out to do. Go create another web page. Go write another chapter of the book. Go for a walk and clear your head. And if you're really feeling stuck or crappy, go to a 7-Eleven and give somebody behind the counter a compliment. Go do something to make somebody else's day better.
It's very interesting. It's that action step.
Yeah,
is so critical. It's almost, and I can only speak for myself, and I should really reinforce that whenever we speak to any expert, and I never do, Jane. And I just assume if you want to do something, you have to take action. But it's really a big step that
you're right. It's easy to just assume because we just think it's not going to happen unless you do the action part. And I also know a lot of people who spend a lot of time just, listening to the tapes and looking in the mirror and saying the affirmations and, do it. That's fine. And then go file your taxes, clean out a drawer, do something. Do something to get the energy moving in a different way if you have to.
Yes, you're absolutely right.
If you've ever read The Artist's Way, it's a really cool. I've done it a couple times, and I went back to it recently, and I sort of feel like there's a couple of things that it suggests that were incredibly. I mean, that was a life-changing book for me, and I've gone through it, I believe, about 3 times, and every time I do, something very large comes out of it, whether it's a new project. At one point, there's an activity in the Artist's Way where it says, design your ideal environment. And I started thinking about that, and we were living in a very small house that we had just remodeled. We put a fortune into remodeling this house, and it was really beautiful, and it was still too small. I mean, it was like maybe 4 or 5 years later. And I'd finally paid that off, and everything was kind of cool. But I just realized, even though there were a lot of improvements in the house, it still wasn't my ideal environment. When I sat down and made my list of what I wanted, what kind of space I wanted, what part of town I wanted, what space what I needed space for. And I made a list, and I made this list of, what would be in my ideal environment. And this was like very early in the morning. My husband was still asleep, and I finished that, and I looked at it, and when I woke my husband up, I was like, Jerry, wake up. He was like, what's the matter? I said, we're not in our ideal environment. And he just like pulled his pillow over his head. It's like, oh my God, what is she up to now? And it was at that point that I realized it was time. We had, again, the stage had gotten too small. See, the universe gives us signals. It gives us these messages. And in this case, it came from this silly little exercise in this book I was reading that I chose to do. not just reading, I actually took the step of writing out the description of my ideal environment, what that looked like. And and I dragged her to a couple, open houses, and we were looking at some places, and I went, nope, this isn't it, this isn't it, this isn't it. And finally, we went to a house that it was just so not for us. But the realtor was there, and he says, what do you think? And I said, this isn't my ideal environment. And he says, okay, what is your ideal environment? And I pulled out this list, and I handed it to him. And he looked at it, and he read it. And he turned around and he wrote down what is now the address of the house I'm in.
Wow. Okay.
He said, here's your house. He says, I've got exactly what you wanted. I wanted a walkout basement. I wanted a 3-car garage because we needed a place to store inventory. I wanted a deck. I wanted it on one side of, one part of town. And he wrote down the address, and it was like, we walked in and I looked around. And it's like, where do I sign?
Yeah.
It was
the universe had said it was time for you to get that environment to move on to what you need to move on to.
Yeah. And it gave me an opportunity to do the action, the homework that, I'm sitting there saying, it would be nice to have a music room or an exercise room or an extra garage space or a garage space, because my last house didn't even have a garage. So this was like fantasy land. And I'm thinking, where's this going to go? Well, it went and it became my new house with an office built into it, So here we be.